The market square was loud with voices, full of smoke and dust, but one sound cut through everything, a soft cry from a woman in chains, the human trader named. Ray stopped walking and turned his head slowly. He had just landed on the outer station of Kiro 7, a border colony between human and alien territories, a place known for black market deals and secret trades. Ray was here to sell spare parts and fuel, but the moment he heard that cry, his heart paused. A group of armored guards dragged an alien woman through the crowd. Her skin was pale blue, her dress torn and dirty, and her silver hair hung in knots across her face. She was crying, but not out of fear. There was something sharp in her voice, something like a warning. "They killed my mate," she shouted as they pulled her by the neck chain. "And they will kill you too if you do not stop them." People laughed and pointed, shouting things like, "She's crazy, and she lost her mind during the war." One of the vendors looked at Ray and said, "Don't listen to her, she's mad." Completely broken, but Ray did not move, not yet. He looked at the woman again, and her eyes met his. Through the smoke there was no madness in those eyes, only pain and a deep, terrible truth. The guard shoved her into a metal cage at the side of the market square. She fell to her knees, still whispering the same words over and over again. Ray felt something stir inside him, something he thought he had lost long ago. Curiosity, or maybe something like mercy. He walked up to the guard at the cage. "How much for the prisoner?" he asked. The guard looked at him with surprise, then laughed. "This one, she is no good for anything. Used to be some officer's wife during the rebellion. Now she thinks everyone is out to get her. Makes noise every day, talks about dead things and hidden plans. Complete waste." Ray repeated his question, this time louder, firmer. "How much?" The guard shrugged and held up 5 fingers. 5 credits. "And she's yours, but don't blame me if she tears your ship apart while screaming about ghosts." Ray handed him the credits without another word. He stepped toward the cage and opened the lock. The alien woman looked up at him, confused, scared, but still strong. He offered her his hand. She did not take it right away, but then she stood slowly and stepped out of the cage, her chains dragging behind her. Ray led her away from the crowd, past the merchant stalls, through the alley, and back to his ship. He sat her down in the medbay and gave her water. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him carefully and answered in a soft voice, "Alicia." Ray nodded. "Why did they lock you up?" She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deep. "Because I know something I should not. Because I saw what they did. And because I survived." Ray sat down across from her. "Tell me." Alicia looked around, checking every shadow, every vent, every corner, then leaned closer. "They killed my mate because he found the map to something buried under the ruins of Vedra 4. Something they tried to erase from history." "What is it?" Ray asked. She shook her head. "They call it a weapon, but it is not. It is a cure. A cure for the sickness they created, the sickness that gave them control." Ray felt cold all of a sudden. "Why tell me?" "Because you stopped," she whispered. "You heard me. And because now they will come for you too." Ray stood and began checking the ship's systems. He did not know if she was telling the truth, or if the madness people warned him about was real, but something inside told him she was not lying. She spoke like someone who had lost everything and still held on to the one thing that mattered, truth. He looked back at her and said, "Get some rest. We leave in 1 hour." Alicia smiled for the first time, but it was not a happy smile. It was a tired one, like a smile from someone who knew that rest would not come easy. Ray locked the ship's hatch and set a course into deep space. He did not know where this would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. He had listened to the Madwoman, and now his life would never be the same again. The engines roared to life behind him. Alicia whispered something he could barely hear. "They'd buried it deep, but I still remember the way." And with that, the ship rose into the stars, carrying the human and the widow toward the truth. No one wanted them to find asterisk. The stars moved slowly outside the ship as Ray watched the widow from across the cockpit. She had not spoken since they left the colony, and her eyes stared at nothing, as if she was hearing voices from another world. Ray kept checking the sensors, but there was no sign of pursuit yet. He had flown through dangerous space before, but this time felt different. This time he was carrying something unknown, and every instinct in his body told him to turn back. Still, he stayed on course. Alicia suddenly stood and walked toward the back room. Ray followed her quietly. She opened a small door that led to the storage bay and sat on the floor without saying a word. She began to hum softly like a lullaby. Without sound, Ray leaned against the wall and waited. Finally, she looked up and spoke. They made me remember something no one else was supposed to know. She reached for her sleeve and pulled it back, revealing her arm. At first, Ray saw nothing but blue skin marked by faint scars. Then the light shifted and something began to glow. Strange shapes appeared under her skin, like ancient script and star patterns. Ray stepped closer and stared. He had seen a chart like this before, once in an old file during a mission on a research vessel, but this was more advanced, more accurate, more Alicia said in a quiet voice. This was burned into me by force when they found out my mate had memorized the location of the cure. They erased his mind before killing him, but they could not find the map. They thought I would never survive the process, but I did. Ray touched the glowing lines and traced a curve that matched a known system. On the outer rim, these are real stars, he whispered, as if speaking might make the light vanish. Alicia nodded slowly. They made sure I would never forget the path and never reach it either. Ray stood and turned back toward the cockpit. He adjusted the course and locked in coordinates toward the forgotten system near Vedra 4. He had heard stories of that place, a battlefield turned to dust, a graveyard of machines and bones. No one dared to explore it because ships disappeared and signals were lost. Now he knew why. It was not cursed, it was protected. Just as Ray confirmed the new route, an alarm flashed on the screen. A ship was approaching fast from behind. Ray ran to the turret console and scanned the incoming vessel. It was a hunter ship designed for speed and silent strikes. Ray grabbed the controls and shouted for Alicia to brace herself. The enemy ship fired without warning and the hull shook as Ray pulled into a spin. He flew through a field of broken asteroids, using every trick he knew to escape. Alicia held on and whispered strange words again, her eyes glowing faintly like before. Ray launched a decoy pod and turned the ship downward toward a dark planet to break the lock. The enemy followed for another minute, but then turned away. Either they lost the signal or they had other plans. Ray landed on a quiet moon to make repairs and catch his breath. He looked at Alicia, who was now lying on the floor, breathing hard. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head, but said nothing. Her hand clutched her side where the chains had cut deep during her capture. Ray wrapped the wound with clean cloth and sat beside her. Why do they want this cure hidden? He asked. Alicia looked up with tired eyes and said, because it removes control. What kind of control? She pointed at her head, then her heart. It heals what they broke in others, and it makes people question the lies they were given. They fear it because it gives people freedom from fear and pain. And silence. Ray leaned back and stared at the dark sky through the window. He had always believed the war ended because peace was signed. Now he saw it ended because those in power decided what truth should survive. He thought about all the refugees he had seen over the years, the broken soldiers, the forgotten colonies, the children born on ships with no home. What if one thing could change it? What if this cure was real? Alicia slowly stood and walked to the front of the ship again. She placed her glowing arm on the navigation panel and spoke a word in her language. A second map opened, showing a secret route through hidden systems. Ray had never seen such paths before. Each one was marked with symbols of danger, but also of light. She turned and said, this map does not just lead to the cure, it leads to the truth, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. Ray took a deep breath and powered the engines again. They lifted off the moon and left the dead world behind. Now they were not just running, they were chasing something the galaxy had buried long ago, and if Alicia was right, it would change everything. Even if it meant making enemies of the entire galaxy. Ray was ready. He had already listened to the widow once, and he would keep listening until the end. The ship dropped through the gray clouds of Vedra 4, where silence ruled and shadows never moved. Ray sat still in the cockpit as the ruined city appeared below, like a skeleton left under the sky-twisted towers leaned over cracked roads, and broken ships lay like old bones among ash-covered streets. The scanners picked up no heat, no movement, no life. Alicia stood beside him, her eyes wide and her breath slow, as if she was remembering a nightmare. This place was once alive. She said, our people lived here in peace before the purge came. Ray guided the ship toward the center, where a black crater stretched across the heart of the city. He found a flat roof and landed the ship softly, the dust rising like fog. When the hatch opened, the air smelled like old metal and dry death. Alicia stepped out first, her bare feet silent on the stone. Ray followed close, his weapon drawn, though no enemy showed. They walked through the ruins past signs written in a language he could not read. Walls were covered in burn marks and holes from plasma fire. They turned a corner and found a strange sight. A row of machines stood still in perfect order like statues. Frozen mid-steep, each one held a tool or device as if stopped during work. Alicia reached for one of them and touched its chest gently. The machine's eyes lit up for 1 second, then went dark again. Ray frowned but said nothing. Ahead stood a tall building, shaped like a half-moon, its windows shattered, its door buried under rubble. Alicia raised her hands and began to sing a soft note that echoed through the walls. The ground shook and the rubble moved, sliding aside like it had heard the song before. Ray stared as the doorway opened by itself and a gust of cold wind blew out. Inside was darkness and silence. They stepped into the hall where dust fell like slow snow from the ceiling. The lights flickered, then one by one turned on, revealing smooth metal walls with strange symbols glowing faint blue. At the end of the hall was a door with no handle, only a red pen. Alicia placed her glowing arm on the panel, and the door slid open behind. It was a chamber filled with floating screens and broken chairs. Ray stepped in slowly, looking around. "This is a command room," he said. Alicia walked to the center where a round table rose from the floor. She pressed her hand to the surface, and the room came alive. Footage played in the air above the table, showing a meeting of leaders, both human and alien. Ray watched in silence as the scene unfolded. One man stood out among the humans. Ray knew that face it was Commander Vale, the same man who once gave him a medal for bravery. In the footage, Vale leaned forward and spoke to a council. He said the cure must be sealed forever and the planet destroyed to stop the rebellion from spreading hope. Ray's jaw tightened as he listened. Alicia whispered, "This is what they erased from records, what they called madness." When I tried to speak it, Ray shook his head, unable to look away. Another screen showed an image of the vault buried under the city with a countdown ticking beside it. Suddenly, a loud beep filled the chamber and the door slammed shut behind them. Gas hissed from the vents and lights turned red. Ray grabbed Alicia and pulled her toward the far wall where a small hatch marked emergency opened with a kick. They crawled through a narrow tunnel. As the gas thickened behind them, Ray could hear Alicia coughing, but she kept moving with him. At the end of the tunnel, they burst into a storage room and slammed the hatch closed. Ray helped her stand and checked her eyes. They were wet and red, but still full of fire. He looked at the small data chip he had pulled from the console before the alarm went off. "This is proof," he said. "We can show the galaxy now." Alicia nodded weakly and whispered, "But they already know we have it, and they will chase us across every system." Ray stared out the broken window at the dead city below, the machines, the silence, the sealed truth beneath the rubble. Everything screamed of betrayal. He thought of the people who died here, the voices that were silenced, and the lies that were written instead. Now he held the truth in his hand, and his name would be next on the list if they found him still. He smiled a little, because even if the city had died, the truth still breathed, and it had chosen him and Alicia to speak for. I've helped her back to the ship and powered up the engines. As they rose into the sky, the crater below flickered with hidden lights, like the city itself was watching them leave. Ray whispered to himself, "I see you now, and I will not forget." Alicia rested her head on his shoulder, and the stars opened before them once more. The ship floated in silence above Vedra 4 as Ray stared at the chip in his hand beside him. Alicia sat wrapped in a blanket, her skin pale and her breathing uneven. She had not spoken since they escaped the chamber, her strength slipping away with each passing hour. Ray loaded the chip into his console, and the data unfolded across the screen. He watched again as Commander Vale spoke with cold precision, ordering the destruction of an entire city. He saw other faces, two ones he remembered from his own military days, men who had taught him discipline, who praised him for loyalty, who gave speeches about truth and peace. Now he knew what their peace cost and what their truth really meant. Ray turned to Alicia. "What is this cure really?" he asked. She opened her eyes slowly and spoke with effort. "It is not a weapon, it is a seed." Ray leaned closer. "A seed of what?" Alicia touched her chest above her heart. "It heals the mind and The body, it stops the sickness they created to keep colonies weak. It breaks the fear that holds people down. She coughed and closed her eyes again. My mate found it in a lab hidden deep inside this city. He recorded it and planned to share it with the free worlds, but they found out. Ray stood and paced the room. They killed him and branded you mad because you tried to tell the truth. Alicia nodded once. They turned my memories into nightmares. They locked me in chains and made people laugh at my pain. Ray looked back at the stars. They will come after us now. They will call me a traitor for helping you. Alicia whispered. Then let them, because you have already crossed the line and there is no way back. Ray breathed and slowly and set a course toward the inner systems where the central data hubs floated. If he could reach one, he could broadcast the files across public channels and force the truth into the light. As he prepared the ship, a new signal appeared on the screen. A massive dreadnought was moving through nearby space, heading straight toward them. Ray cursed under his breath and pushed the ship into motion. Alicia forced herself to stand, her hand gripping the wall for balance. If they catch us, they will not keep us alive this time. Ray glanced at her and said, then we stay ahead of them. The dreadnought began to send out small hunter crafts, scanning for signs of movement. Ray powered down most systems and drifted among the rocks, letting the ship disappear into the cold shadows. For hours they stayed still, listening to the low hum of the enemy ships circling like sharks. Alicia sat in silence, her fingers tracing the glowing marks on her skin as if reading them again for the thousandth time. Ray could see she was slipping further each hour, the damage from the poison gas taking her strength little by little. He wished he had something to give her, but there was nothing left but hope. Finally, the hunters moved on, pulled away by a false signal Ray had sent toward the south belt. He powered up again and sped toward a nearby moon where a secret outpost once used by rebels still stood. The station was barely holding together, but it had a link to the old network, and that was enough. Ray docked the ship and carried Alicia in his arms, her body light as paper. He placed her in a medical bed and connected her to basic support, then ran to the console. As he inserted the chip, the files loaded and the screen blinked. Radar warning flashed: unauthorized data detected. Ray clicked through the firewall and launched the upload. The signal moved slowly across weak satellites, heading toward the outer colonies. He could only hope someone out there was listening behind him. Alicia called his name softly. He rushed to her side. Her eyes were wide and her voice clearer than before. I remember something else, a second location, not on the map, a vault inside a floating city above the moons of Terras. Ray nodded and held her hand. We will go there next. After the truth spreads, she smiled and whispered, you believe me when no one else would, and now you will carry the truth for all of us. Ray felt the weight of her words like armor on his shoulders. He stood and looked at the stars again. This was no longer about survival, it was about justice, the kind that no government could erase, no lie could bury, and no war could silence. As the upload reached the final stage, a new alarm blared. Another ship was coming fast, not a hunter, not a dreadnought. Something faster and unknown. Ray locked the doors and stood ready. He would not run this time. He had made his choice, and whatever came next, he would face it with the widow's truth burning like fire in his hands. Asterisk, the name Ray Calder was once respected across the outer colonies and remembered by soldiers and traitors alike. Now it was on every warning list, every bounty poster, every government feed marked in red with the word traitor beside it. Ray sat in the dark cockpit of a stolen scout ship flying low through the rings of a mining world where the noise of machines masked their trailess chalet. Behind him, weak but alive, her body still fighting the poison from the vault. The files had been sent, but only a few fringe systems had picked them up and believed them. Most media channels called the footage fake. The leaders denied everything and said Ray had been brainwashed by an alien criminal. Some planets offered gold for his capture, others warned their citizens not to listen to any message from him. Ray kept moving system by system, ship by ship, leaving behind broken engines and cracked helmets as proof of the fights he had survived. Did not speak much and he did not sleep often. The truth had a price and he was paying it every day. Alicia opened her eyes and looked at him as he checked their current position. They have turned the whole sky against you, and still you do not stop. Ray smiled without joy. I cannot stop, not when the cure still exists, and not when they are still chasing lies. Alicia coughed and leaned back, her voice growing weaker again. There is a rebel moon in the Almar sector, a place where old warriors sleep unbroken. Truths are still shared in whispers. Ray adjusted the controls and changed course without question. They reached the moon after 2 days flying through old war tunnels and past broken satellites still floating from past battles. The surface was jagged and cold, but the bunker below was warm and full of light. A group of exiled fighters welcomed them not with guns but with silent nods. These were people who had seen too much and lost too much to believe what the council said. Ray showed them the files and they watched without speaking. When the footage ended, one of the elders stood and placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. We believed you before you arrived, and now we stand with you. For the first time in weeks, Ray felt something close to hope. Together, they rebuilt an old transmitter and sent the files again, but this time through rebel channels that reached deep into colony networks. Messages came back not from leaders but from farmers. Teachers, pilots, and children. People were starting to believe. Ray returned to the ship and found Alicia resting with her eyes closed and her hand over her chest. He sat beside her and spoke softly. They are listening now more than before, and the rebels will help us find the vault in the Sky City. Alicia nodded once, but her breath was shallow and slow. Ray held her hand and stayed there as the ship powered up again. They flew toward the moons of Terras, where the floating city was last seen 10 years ago. Hidden in the clouds above a gas giant, the council sent ships to intercept them, but Ray used every route, every shadow, and every trick to escape. He moved like a ghost through space, guided by the memory of a widow who refused to die silent. At last the city appeared above the clouds, its towers still standing, its lights still flickering. It looked like a dream, half forgotten and half remembered. Ray docked the ship and carried Alicia inside, where the air was clean and the halls untouched by time. They passed golden statues of scientists and healers and glass walls filled with names of those who once lived here. In the center of the city, they found a chamber sealed by a symbol that glowed. When Alicia touched it, the door opened slowly, and inside was a small garden with a single tree and a pool of clear water. The center was a pod glowing with soft light, holding a vial of blue liquid. Ray stepped forward and reached for it, but Alicia held his arm. It must be given freely, not taken in anger or fear or pride. Ray knelt and whispered words of thanks, not just for the cure, but for the path that brought them here. The pod opened and the vial floated into his hand, warm and full of light. Alicia smiled faintly and leaned into him. You carry not just my truth, but the truth of many who never had a voice. Ray nodded and held her close. Outside, the city alarms began to flash as enemy ships entered orbit, but Ray did not run this time. He stood tall with the cure in one hand and Alicia by his side. He had been labeled a traitor, but soon the galaxy would call him something else. The one who listened, the one who believed, the one who brought the truth back from the silence. Asterisk. The stars above the gas giant burned cold as Ray flew the ship away from the floating city with the vial safe inside a sealed case behind him. Alicia slept with her head resting gently on the side of the seat, her breathing steady but quiet. Ray knew time was running short and they had only one place left to go, a forgotten satellite, drifted alone at the edge of the Jera system, hidden inside the orbit of a dead sun. Long ago, it had belonged to an independent broadcast station used by miners and rebel outposts. Now it was silent, but silence was safer than noise. When everyone was trying to kill you, Ray reached the edge of the system and turned off every signal, every pulse, and every light. He moved slow through the black mist that circled the dead sun like a veil. Then he saw it. The station floated ahead, covered in frost and shadow, its lights off, and its panels cracked. Ray docked the ship and opened the hatch, stepping into the darkness with a tool light in one hand and the case in the other. He followed the corridor until he reached the main hub, where a small console still blinked red, waiting for a command. He powered it up and began linking the data core to the ship system. If he could upload the cure and the full records from the city and the vault, maybe, just maybe, the signal would spread far enough. He did not hope for miracles. He only needed someone to listen. Suddenly, a voice whispered through the broken speaker behind him, "You are late." Ray turned fast with his weapon raised, but he saw only one person standing in the doorway, a woman in a dark coat with a face marked by burn scars and old tattoos. She held no weapon, but her eyes were sharp like glass and fire. Ray lowered his gun but did not relax. "Who are you?" She stepped into the light and smiled without warmth. I am the one who survived after they hunted us down. I was a researcher at the city. Before it fell, and I know what you carry, Ray narrowed his eyes. Then you know what it means and why I have to send it. She walked slowly around the console and placed a small cube on the table. I knew someone would come one day, someone who believed the truth and had the courage to share it. Ray looked at the cube. What is that? She tapped the cube and a series of files opened above it. These are the names of every person who died during the purge and every scientist who tried to protect the cure even if it cost them everything. Ray felt his throat tighten as he read some of the names. Children, mothers, medics, and soldiers, thousands, gone without a word, without a grave, without a voice. I want to add their names to your signal, she said. Ray nodded slowly. Then let us make this signal loud enough to wake the stars. Together they began the upload. It took time. The station shook once as a meteor passed close, but no enemy ship had found them yet. Ray watched the progress bar move slowly across the screen. 50%, 60, 70, then the lights dimmed and the power began to flicker. Ray rushed to the core room and found one of the reactors leaking. He grabbed the tools and climbed into the panel, fixing wires with shaking hands as sparks danced around his face. Behind him, the woman shouted that the signal was stalling. He shouted back that it would hold and kept working until the power came back online. 90%. Alicia stepped into the room, her body weak, but her eyes full of calm. She placed her hand on the console and began to hum softly the same song she sang in the city, the same melody that opened doors and remembered voices. The signal pulsed stronger with her voice and the console glowed brighter. Then it finished. 100% complete. The data had been sent across rebel satellites, emergency beacons, old trade lines, and forgotten channels. It would reach deep into colonies and old freighter ships and refugee camps where the truth still mattered. Ray leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Alicia smiled and said, "They will know now. They will see us and hear us and remember us." Ray nodded and looked at the case in his hand. Inside was the cure, still glowing with blue light. He turned to the woman who had helped them and asked, "Will you guard this place?" She nodded once. "With my life." Ray and Alicia returned to the ship and left the dead sun behind. As they moved back into open space, messages began to appear on the screen. Words from strangers across the galaxy. "Thank you, we believe you. Where can we find the cure?" Ray read each one with a quiet heart and a steady hand. They had sent the last signal of the forgotten. Now the galaxy was awake. The court chamber of the Galactic Council stood tall like a mountain of gold and glass, with banners of every world hanging from the ceiling. Thousands gathered in the circle, some in armor, some in robes, and others in silence, holding small devices that showed the broadcast now playing across every system. Ray stood in the center alone, his hands holding the case that carried the cure. Behind him walked Alicia, her steps slow but her head high, her silver hair tied back, her scars showing like a crown. The guards stepped aside and the council judge raised a hand to silence the noise. "You are here today under charges of rebellion, espionage, and the spread of false information," he said. Ray said nothing. He opened the case and lifted the vial for all to see. "This is the truth," he said. "And you know it?" the crowd murmured, but the judge slammed the staff down. "You bring chaos to order. You speak of crimes without proof, and you aid a woman long declared mentally unfit and dangerous." Ray pressed a button and the files from the city, the vault, and the satellite appeared in the air above them. The judge tried to stop the display, but the signal was already public. Every world, every ship, every child in school, and every mother in a shelter now saw the truth. Images of burned cities, orders signed by the same leaders now sitting on the throne, footage of scientists crying out before the purge, and then the final moment. Alicia in chains, whispering the words, "No one believed my mate was killed because he remembered the cure." The chamber fell silent. No one spoke as the light from the files faded. The judge sat back, his face pale and his hands shaking. Alicia stepped forward and faced the crowd. "You called me mad because I carried the memory of what they tried to destroy. You chained me and laughed at me and called me broken. But I remembered and I survived and I spoke until someone listened." Ray looked at her and said, "You were never mad. You were right. Now they all know it." One of the council members stood and removed his badge. "I served during the purge. I followed orders and told myself it was for peace, but I see now that peace built on silence is not peace at all. Others followed, some stepping down, some bowing in apology, some looking away in shame. The judge turned to Ray and Alicia. The cure must be studied, it must be tested, it cannot be released without order. Ray shook his head. The people will decide now, not you, not your counsel, not your fear. He handed the vial to a group of rebel medics who had come with them and stepped back. The crowd began to cheer slowly at first, then louder, with voices rising across systems and screens. Messages poured in again from colonies and planets and ships and families. We believe her, we believe them, we want the cure. Ray and Alicia left the chamber not as criminals but as messengers of something stronger than any weapon. Truth outside the sky was full of ships, some armed, some broken. All watching, Alicia looked up and smiled. For years I thought I would die, with the truth locked inside my heart, but now it flies through the stars. Ray looked at her and asked, "What will you do now?" She turned her face toward the sun and said, "I will rest, I will heal, I will plant a tree where the city once burned. And I will wait for the day when no one is called mad for remembering pain." Ray nodded and stepped beside her. "I will keep flying and I will keep listening, because somewhere someone else is whispering their truth right now and waiting for a voice to answer." Together they walked into the new day under a sky that no longer hid the past. Stand in the far corner of the galaxy, a child asked her mother, "Who was the woman they called mad?" The mother smiled and answered, "She was the one who remembered when all others forgot. And she was the one who made the stars." Listen. And that story would be told again and again, not with fear, not with shame, but with pride, because once there was a widow in chains who cried in a forgotten square, and a human who stopped to listen, and that was how everything changed forever.